Hello, I'm Axel Rothbart, Doc History, and I'm standing here at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum in Yorba Linda, California. Behind me you can see Richard Nixon's birthplace, and here we are in a beautiful garden alongside a reflecting pool. Richard Nixon's legacy, all of his accomplishments, are marred by a single incident that took place while he was in office. On June 17, 1972, when he was running for re-election for his second term. Richard Nixon was a member of the Republican Party. His Democratic Party opponent, George McGovern, had based his operations out of the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. On June 17, 1972, a security guard named Frank Wills discovered a group of burglars breaking into the complex. The burglars appeared in court the next day, and some interesting information came out about them. Turned out that they all had ties to the committee to re-elect the president. It turns out that all of the burglars were well associated with Richard Nixon's campaign, that one of them served as the head of security for Richard Nixon's campaign, and that they were all on the campaign payroll, either directly or indirectly. Investigations soon began into members of the campaign. E. Howard Hunt, G. Gordon Liddy. These individuals who were charged with re-electing President Nixon came under investigation to whether or not they played a role in the break-in. Richard Nixon was easily re-elected in November of that year. He won 49 out of 50 states. But the investigation into what happened continued. The question was, who knew about the break-in? Who ordered the break-in? These questions were not so easily answered. As time went on, it became clear the members of Richard Nixon's Justice Department were attempting to cover up the break-in. It turns out that several of Richard Nixon's senior aides, Ehrlichman and Haldeman, had knowledge or appeared to have knowledge of the break-in. Richard Nixon ordered his Attorney General to appoint a special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, to look into this. As information continued to unravel about who knew what and when they knew it regarding the Watergate break-in, members of Richard Nixon's team, his senior advisors, started to resign. They were taking the fall. The question soon became, how high up, how far up the chain of ladder did information about Watergate go? Richard Nixon was concerned when Archibald Cox ordered him to release tapes that he had recorded inside the White House. He taped every conversation. Nixon refused to release the tapes. He argued that it was his executive privilege, that as president, he did not have to tell the public every conversation that went on in the White House. Cox persisted. Was Richard Nixon hiding in the tapes that he knew about the Watergate break-in? Richard Nixon proposed a compromise. He suggested that an elderly senator, John Stennis, listen to the tapes. But everyone knew that Stennis was deaf. Stennis would not have been able to hear whether or not there was corruption going on, whether or not Nixon had in fact ordered the break-in. Nixon then ordered that Archibald Cox be fired, but Nixon's Attorney General refused to fire him. So Nixon fired his Attorney General and appointed a new one. He ordered his new Attorney General to fire Archibald Cox. His new Attorney General refused. Richard Nixon then fired him and appointed all on the same night in October 1973 another Attorney General, Robert Bork. Bork finally said that he was going to fire Archibald Cox. Well, by this point, the public was outraged, and so was Congress. Congress opened up an investigation formally, officially, into any wrongdoing that may have been done by the president. Richard Nixon was forced to release his tapes to the public. In doing so, they found that there was 18.5 minutes of tape that was missing. Nixon claimed that his secretary, Rosemary Woods, had accidentally erased those 18.5 minutes. Many people believe that it would have contained a smoking gun, proof, evidence of the president's complicity. Richard Nixon, in July of 1974, was ordered to release all of the contents of his tapes to the public by the United States Supreme Court. By that point, it was clear that he no longer had the support of the American people or the Republican Party in Congress. On October 8th of that year, Richard Nixon announced the next day, October 9th, 1974, he would resign from the presidency.
Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
He is the first president, and thus far the only president, to resign. Gerald Ford, his vice president, then became president of the United States, and a month later pardoned Nixon of any possible wrongdoing that Nixon would have had in the Watergate affair, officially ending it. Questions still remain. What did Nixon know about Watergate? Who ordered it? There was never a smoking gun. There's no evidence that the president knew about it or ordered it. But why all the secrecy then? These questions complicate Richard Nixon's legacy. For Doc History, I'm Maxwell Rothbart.